Good morning, sunshine. I'm Carey Pena alongside Brandon Lee. We are so happy to have you with us here watching us on YouTube or listening to us on our podcast. This show is all about mental health, mental strength, and lifting ourselves up. And we're really committed to delving into those topics.
Absolutely. And one thing, it's routine for me every morning. We all have a morning routine, right? Some people do coffee, right? We all have a morning routine. And one of the first things I do when I wake up, I go to a Google search and I type in behavioral health and addiction news. I encourage you to do that as well. I've learned so much every single morning about what's being done scientifically and what other people are talking about when it comes to behavioral health. A couple of headlines that I just loved reading on my way to work this morning. Volunteering in times of crisis. So as really journalists that we've been for decades.
Yeah, I see us both holding our pens, like we're ready to anchor with some breaking news.
But we've covered a lot of traumatic things. I mean, I lived and worked through 9/11, right? I'm going to use that as an example. When I was in New York City and 9/11 happened that morning, right? When a traumatic event, life event happens, the Red Cross is usually out at the scene, right? They're providing food, they're providing shelter, the basic of necessities. What I love now, what's happening, is that when there are times of crisis, there's now a whole behavioral health crisis response team that is going on day one dispatch.
Huge.
We're talking about psychologists, therapists, behavioral health techs, because when trauma happens, whether it be an earthquake or a house fire, row of house fires, or a tornado, wildfires, whatever it may be, a natural disaster, people's trauma needs to be addressed at that very moment. So the fact that there is, you got your Red Cross, you got your food, you got your shelter, but now they're starting to address it immediately with teams of therapists, psychiatrists, and behavioral techs to really help folks mentally get through it.
It is interesting because we have covered so many traumatic stories, and you don't always realize as a journalist that that also impacts you. I remember the Sunday that the Granite Mountain hotshots, when that fire was happening, and I got a text in the late afternoon that says all these firefighters, we don't know how many, but 15 plus, something really bad has happened. And I remember getting that text thinking, that can't be that many firefighters all at once. And that story depressed me so much. I do want to talk, though, also about this, because I love this other article about how volunteering cures burnout.
Okay, this is so cool, and I got to give a lot of props to CEOs of companies who are now going full steam with this, all right? We all know that volunteering helps, right? It not only helps the folks that we're trying to help, but it also helps ourselves. It makes us feel good.
Yeah.
So now they've done studies that companies are now allowing their workers to go and volunteer on company time. Because they are seeing growth in their own business.
It's team building.
It's team building.
Authentic team building.
And people are coming back to work more productive after spending a few hours of their day going out and helping others.
I can tell you that psychologically for me, anytime I've gone through a period that's been a struggle for me, I try to get outside my own self, get outside. And so it's not about me. And I think, what can I do in the community? How can I help someone else? And that is very healing and therapeutic. So I'm so glad to see that companies are understanding that that is truly a transformative opportunity for them.
And hugely, and I'll add this in there, Community Bridges, a large treatment center here in the Valley, they've joined Art of Our Soul, not for their patients, not for their clients, solely for their frontline nurses and staff.
Oh, I love that.
And they get to come here to Art of Our Soul and create artwork once a week on company time.
So before we bring in our first guest, and she's standing by right here, we should tell folks who are just maybe tuning in, who don't know us, but we're coming to you live from the Center for Positive Media, which is our collaborative space based here in Phoenix, Arizona. I run a media operation here, a production house, Inspired Media 360. Brandon, who left his anchoring job on the news, is now doing art therapy, Art of Our Soul. And just in a matter of months, you've sold out with all of the treatment centers and facilities. So, I mean, you're killing it in the game.
It's amazing. It just shows me that there is a need.
And now we want to go to our story behind the story. On every episode, we want to dedicate some time to someone who is really inspirational and who is really not afraid to tell their own story, even when it's hurtful and hard. And certainly the woman we're introducing right now, Hannah Kirkpatrick, is here to share a little bit about what she's been through.
Mrs. America 2021. So good to have you here.
That's what they say.
So good to have you here.
We're hugging now. We're hugging. Yes.
It's so nice. Thank you for having me.
Interviews done in person, no longer on Skype or Zoom.
Yeah, hallelujah.
I'm loving that. No more FaceTimes with this. Just come
yeah.
in, talk in person.
Heart to heart. Here we
So,
go.
okay,
Let's
it's so
do
good
it.
to have you here because you were introduced to me by a mutual friend of ours, Kristen Day, and she goes, Brandon, I have this friend, Hannah. Hi, Kristen, you're gonna love this. She goes, oh my God, they just said my name. I know Kristen. That's exactly what she's doing right now. And she goes, you're gonna love Hannah. It's her story. She's using her platform for good, and we're all about people who do have a large platform, in which you do, using that for good. Take me back to 2009 for you, because I am a firm believer that a lot of it is unhealed trauma is the gateway to addiction and behavioral health issues. It's not necessarily the case for everyone, and Hannah's a case of that. But take me back to 2009. You describe it as a hurricane that was happening in your life. What did 2009 look like for Hannah?
Right. Well, so on the outside, it looked pretty ideal. And here's where addiction is just this really ugly beast, right? Is that nobody could tell how much I was suffering inside. I had this fantastic job, like the corner office situation. I had a great car with 3 letters that I always wanted, I was the belle of the ball at the local bars, like every bartender knew me. So I thought I was pretty cool at that point, right? It's not a good way to get your identity. No. I'm just saying. It feels good in the moment, but not recommended to young people. And it felt like I was on the fast track to making it, right? But internally, I was really harming myself in so many ways. I was just such a perfectionist that nothing I ever did was enough. Nothing I ever did was right. I never felt pretty enough, and so I would go out and seek validation from other people. I never felt smart enough, and so I had to get a promotion, or I had to get a fancy job that my parents would brag about, or I had to do things that would be impressive on a resume so that I would feel worthy. And that manifested itself by just drinking too much, by recreationally using any other substances that presented themselves. I mentioned by seeking validation outside of my marriage, and it just ended up being this complete collapse of all of the things that I thought, every time I talk about it, it still gets me, that I thought I wanted to be in the world. It's like, what do you do when you feel like you've done everything right in your life to get to a certain place, and then you get there and it feels empty?
So if you could just touch on when you hit rock bottom, tell us what was that like, and how did you know, I've got to change?
The person that I thought was my first love was actually a first addiction. And that person was out of my life for about 10 years and came back in. And at that moment, I thought that was the answer, that was the knight on the white horse that could take all my problems away. And if I could just have him love me, then I would never suffer again. And so I left my husband to go explore that opportunity. And that was a domino effect, because of that, I went off the rockers. I didn't realize until I got into this whole recovery journey that it's actually vulnerability that is our superpower, right? And Brene Brown did this kick-ass TED Talk on it, and she totally launched vulnerability into the mainstream.
love her.
I love her.
Isn't she amazing?
My therapist had me watch that TED Talk on
really?
vulnerability.
Yeah.
100%.
Yes, and I think she has a new book coming out, and she
We
has a
have it,
podcast
yeah.
too. You already have it. All right, so I'm obviously a Brene, devotee. But she, so vulnerability ended up being my superpower, whereas for the early part of my life, it was all about don't let them see you sweat. As long as it looks pretty on the outside and you can show up as confident and you smile, then everything's great. And it took shattering that paradigm completely and me looking at the results of that with this person leaving and then losing my husband, and everything around me literally was gone. And I was like, okay, well, if I look at this as a business sort of transaction, right? Obviously, the results have failed, and so I need to fire myself as the CEO of my own life. I'm just going to be, pretty pragmatic about this, and so I need to find a different CEO than me because I've done my best, and this is where it got me. So, as embarrassing as that might have been to my family, it was a moment of freedom for me. And then I started to find people in the rooms of recovery programs. I checked myself into not an inpatient treatment necessarily, but 3 12-step programs all at once. And I just began to completely reinvent myself from the bottom up of who do I want to be in the world? How can I live in integrity? How do these people who look like they have contentment in their eyes, how do they do it?
As we wrap things up, I just have to ask you, for folks who might be watching and in a dark place, it's kind of hard when you're there because you're like, where do I even begin? Just what is, in short form, one piece of advice that they might hear from you?
That the greatest act of courage is in asking for help. It's not a weakness.
No,
it's the strongest thing you
strength.
could ever do for yourself and for the people around you, to just ask for help. And that's where it begins. All the rest is awesome and uphill from there.
I love that.
Hannah, thank you so much. I think your inner beauty is definitely shining so bright. And I appreciate you coming on here and being so vulnerable and sharing your story. I know Brandon talks about this all the time. You know, being vulnerable is not easy. So well done. We do a lot of reporting on nonprofit organizations, and one of the shows that I produce is Front Doors TV, and we profiled an incredible woman based here in Phoenix. Her name is Tara Shad, and she talked to me about the healing power of horses. Take a look.
We got started a long time ago, 1999 at Arizona State University, actually. And that our founding was preceded by 3 years of research from a sports psychologist named Dr. Debbie Cruz, who investigated the effect of sport on children with special needs. And all those sports, she discovered that horseback riding was the most positive intervention at improving self-esteem and attentional focus, which is where she brought me in and we launched into the community. So we've had our roots for for a long time now, 22 years. And, we moved to Scottsdale in 2008. And yes, we're ready to launch. We are launched.
Tell folks why this matters so much to you personally, because I know that you have such a deep connection to the work that you do.
I'm really, really passionate about it because I feel that horses saved my life as a kid. I credit all that I am today, everything, all of my life skills, my discipline, my hard work, my empathy, my ability to emotionally regulate from learning those things with horses when I was a young kid, and a farmer opened his farm to me. And so for me, it's this act of being able to give that to other people. It's turned into way more than I could have ever imagined. And now I see the impact not only for children, but opening up to first responders with post-traumatic stress and patients with cancer diagnoses coming in, and the hope that those horses gave me that my life could be different, that things can change. I grew up in a home that, like a lot of people, I'm learning it was like a lot of people, but there was a strong fear in my house, and either through a lot of yelling and screaming or parents fighting, a lot of fear around, you can't do that, you're going to get hurt, you're not good, you're going to get pregnant, there's all these fear-driven messages that were given to me, and it never felt safe inside of my house. It felt safer outside with the horses. And so that's where I chose to sleep. That's where I chose to be. That's where I learned that things could be different. And so when I'm working with kids now that are growing up with even more significant trauma in their life than I did, I'm at least able to relate to them. But the effect on the system is similar. You have this constriction, you have this activation, this fear of not being able to do things, or that things are very scary out there. And so I feel like when I'm working with kids and people that are in those positions, that I'm able to apply what happened in my life and give them these opportunities with the horses that allow them to feel what they need to.
I absolutely love what Copy Farms is doing. And
They're
they have
amazing.
that program, especially for folks in the mental health world. When people know that they have a problem and they need to go to treatment, sometimes they will find any excuse, right, to not go. And sometimes, we love our pets are our family, and they're like, well, who's going to take care of my dog while I go to treatment? That's where Copy Farms steps in. They got a program there where if somebody does need to go to treatment, even long-term treatment, they will care for your pet so you don't
I'm
ever have
so
to go to a
glad you
shelter.
brought that up, because Tara is so excited about that program.
It's an amazing
program.
program.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yes, it's an amazing program.
She thinks of something, she manifests it, and she makes it happen.
And it is truly changing lives, because that can be the last little hurdle in order to kind of nudge somebody into treatment.
Yes,
So that's great.
It's a magical place
Yeah.
to be. Now we want to go to our mind, body, spirit segment, and we're going to bring Jamar Pruitt in, and he's with one of the organizations that you do a lot of work with.
Yes, Buena Vista Recovery Center's Jamar, my man. It's always good to see you.
Hi, Jamar. Thank you for being here.
Have a seat. Have a seat. So Jamar's amazing. First off, he's
And I love your shirt. I had to put that out there. We're very bright. We're very bright on Good Morning Sunshine.
So here's why Jamar's amazing. Jamar's amazing because he comes to Art of Our Soul every Monday with all of his clients, and we do art healing. We do art healing sessions every Monday morning. Just in the conversations that I've had with Jamar is just so insightful about so much when it comes to behavioral health. And I see the way his clients, in the art studio react to him and how they speak about him, and they all adore you. They all love you. I want to talk really about this. I'm going to call this the post-pandemic world. And I know there's going to be people out there saying, well, we're not out of the pandemic yet. The reason why I'm going to call this the most post-pandemic part of the world that we're living in now is because everybody's taking the masks off. All the concerts are back, right? Dua Lipa was here recently here in the Valley, and it was a sold-out crowd, right? People are going to sporting events and games, right? Do you have any sense of concern or something that a lot of people will just forget the trauma we've all experienced and just move on, but they can eventually be triggered by that?
Absolutely. I think that, absence, when you're in the midst of a traumatic event, it's just sort of you're in survival mode.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you escape that survival, and all of a sudden you think that you're, out of the forest. But that's not the case. Simple and complex trauma can affect you years and months and whenever. And so you absolutely always have to be taking care of your mental health. And if a person doesn't continue to manage their mental health, eventually it starts to manage them. And that's why I, do the work that I do.
Do you think that it's important that folks at least, consider that the COVID experience has been traumatic? And to Brandon's point, we all want to turn the page, of course. But some experts have said to me that, wow, the numbers of people who are actually suffering PTSD who don't realize that's what this is,
right,
are going to be staggering.
And it fears that they're going to eventually numb with drugs and alcohol.
And the research says that during this time frame, the amount of people that have been reporting anxiety, depression, PTSD is increasing by several percentage points. I don't know, different studies all over the world say different amounts. And so, fueled by isolation, fueled by lack of coping skills, fueled by just not having a lot of options, not being able to connect with people, not being able to be oriented. And you see that by just the amount of things that are happening with the opioid crisis, with the amount of people that are actually on medications, these kind of things. Is just a reflection of that this time that we're in is a very, very stressful time for so many Americans, people around the world.
And you tapped on something there, because I'm a true believer of this, is that, right, they say the opposite of addiction truly is that connection, right? And the pandemic truly stripped that from so many people. It's why we saw a record number of overdoses, right? We saw huge spikes in suicidal ideation, but also suicides, right? Because people were isolated, and we robbed them from that. And it almost became, something that I was questioning was, God, my goodness, what is worse now? What is worse, the isolation or the virus itself, right? And should that be a conversation? Because a lot of times people were stuck at home. They were working from home in this environment. And I think a lot of people started to turn to some substances or other types of behavioral stuff that isn't necessarily healthy during the pandemic. But you don't just quit that all of a sudden.
Just as a beacon of health, I think gravitating towards other people, human touch, human connection, being out, being in social situations, learning how to manage stress, because there was stress before the pandemic, there'll be stress after the pandemic, and finding those avenues to manage your stress in a healthy way, not through drugs, sex, whatever. That's paramount in the post-pandemic era.
Can you talk a little bit to people who are watching and listening about what your suggestions might be? How do you identify if you are feeling that level of stress? When does it go beyond baseline stress to perhaps you're in what could be considered like a traumatic experience?
Sure. And
that could be something dangerous to you or your long-term mental health.
There's been some great advance in mental health treatment and a lot of research through behavioral medicine that really talks about recognizing hypo or hyperarousal, hyper being towards your survival instincts that are more like fight or flight, and hypoarousal being towards your survival instincts that are more like submission and freeze response. And you noticing things like increase in disassociation, kind of like something similar to daydreaming. It may be an indication that your brain is trying to tell you I'm really overwhelmed, being agitated, depressed, these kind of things, agitated, enraged, these kind of things are more hypoarousal, with lethargy or issues with personal hygiene, sleeping a lot, may give you an indication that I am really overwhelmed, and I may need to engage in some activities that allow me to get back to more of homeostasis.
Thank you so much, Jamar. Why don't you just stick with us? We're going to close out the show here, and I feel like, why do we need to say goodbye to you? Because it's,
I don't
you
wanna
know,
say goodbye to
I
you
like,
guys.
stay here
I'm a
with
part of
us.
the family.
But before we even end that, I do want to let you know, we're going to put up a full screen right now of Buena Vista Recovery Center. So if you are struggling at home right now, all the information is right there on your screen. Go ahead, check them out online.
And we end every show on our sunshine story. This is the Crossroads, another organization that you work with, and they're
So awesome.
Yeah,
okay,
the
so
dogs.
awesome. So Crossroads, they are partners with me here at Art of Our Soul. I've done a lot of work with them over the years. Crossroads is coming up with this dog-assisted treatment program. So what they're going to do at the Flower House, one of their flower houses, they're going to build a dog run and a little dog shelter. They're going to go to a shelter, adopt a dog. So they're going to have a rescue dog there, so that the folks who are living in recovery in residential treatment can learn what unconditional love is with a dog there. And I think it's a beautiful program. They needed about $12,000 in order to build this thing. And so I thought to myself, I'm like, my goodness, in my art classes, I'm doing a demonstration every single class, and I just have stacks of artwork that I've created. So I just decided to sell a bunch of those pieces on my gallery. We sold about $2,000 just in the past week. They're matching that, so it's $4,000 of the $12,000 already done, so that they can build this dog run and rescue a dog to help recovery now.
Well, animal therapy, as we've touched on during the
huge.
show, is so huge.
It breaks somebody down. Animals do something to us that just softens us to our core.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for being with us here watching, and for those listening to our podcast, we appreciate you. And you can subscribe to us on YouTube.
Subscribe to us on YouTube. You're going to notice there's a little bell. That's an alert. Click on that. Every time we upload a new episode, you will be alerted about it. And go ahead and share it on all your social media, your Facebook, your LinkedIn, and your Instagram.
And our email, I will memorize this along the way, but for right now, I will read it. realgoodmorningsunshineshow@gmail.com. Thank you all so very much, Jamar. Thank you again for all the good work you're doing. And take good care, everyone, of yourselves and all those you love. Thank you.